Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. It is an honor and pleasure for me to welcome you at the Czech National Bank. I'm very impressed that so many of you decided to join us to discuss an issue which is in the Czech Republic debated with, I would say, fluctuating intensity. The issue is the euro, and should the Czech Republic join it? And if yes, when? Before starting, let's have an experiment, which I always do when I go to talk about the euro to students and to other audiences. Please, if you could use your mobile phones and scan the QR code behind me. This will allow you to enter the Slido, and once you are in, please answer the question which is there. The question should be something, I don't know if it's exactly formulated like this, but the question is, are you personally in favor or against the Czech Republic joining the Eurozone? So please, if you could enter and answer this question, we will show you the result at the end of my introduction. And I think it's always good to ask this question before the presentation. And you can also later on use the Slido for asking questions. I will come to it. The idea to organize this debate was quite spontaneous. And I must admit that I got this idea as a result of two factors. The first group of factors are linked to the substance, to the recent developments which made me, and I assume many of us, think about the euro and its future. There have been many changes to the euro in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, as we all know. And it was claimed that the euro was made much stronger, much more resilient. But once a new crisis arrived, this time it was in the form of COVID, none of these previously created innovations and instruments, for instance, the European stabilization mechanisms, was even touched. And the EU created yet another new crisis instrument. This time it was the common European debt, financing the resilience and recovery facility, something unimaginable some years ago, I would say almost revolutionary. Some people called it the Hamiltonian moment for the European integration, as we know. Another Czech-specific reason to think about the euro is linked to monetary policy. As we all know, monetary policy of the Czech National Bank and of the ECB have been quite different. I will not discuss the reasons for it, but what is clear is that the interest rates in the Czech Republic and therefore the financing costs in Czech koruna are substantially higher than in the euro. By the way, just for you, Paul, our central bank 2 weeks repo rate is at the level of 5.75%, whereas the Eurozone is still in the negative territory. As a result, we see, for instance, an increase in euro-denominated loans by corporations, and some people even say, if we had the euro, inflation in the Czech Republic would be much lower. And last but not least, and very sadly, since February we have had a new geopolitical situation in Europe and in the whole world, namely the war in the Ukraine. And some people think that Europe should geopolitically make itself stronger and more solid, maybe federal, part of which is the common currency. This is why I called the debate COVID, inflation, the war in the Ukraine, is it time for a new debate on the euro? This group of reasons got combined with another fact. We have an interesting topic, I think, which we also need is interesting speakers. We, the Czech National Bank, my colleagues from Monetary Department and from our research division, succeeded in getting to Prague one of the most prominent economists in the area of European monetary integration, professor of economics at the London School of Economics, Paul de Grauwe, who is sitting on my right. Welcome, Paul. Paul is not only an excellent economist, he's also my former teacher. I must say one of the best I have ever had. And I thought once he's in Prague, we should benefit from him not only in our Research Open Day, which was yesterday, but I thought it would be a good idea if we can profit from him also by having him in a public debate. So welcome, Paul. Originally, I thought that I would have with Paul a kind of interview followed by a Q&A session. But this would be probably a bit boring, and therefore I decided to make the debate more lively, limit myself to the role of a moderator, and I invited as a second speaker my former colleague Mojmír Hampl on my left, former Deputy Governor, yes, Mojmír Hampl, former Deputy Governor of the Czech National Bank and currently board member of the Czech Fiscal Council. And those of you who know Mojmír will understand why the debate will most likely not be boring. So welcome, Mojmír. We agree that each of both speakers will have some 8 to 10 minutes to present their main points, and then we will open the floor to all of you. For asking questions, you can either use the traditional way, we have microphones, or you can also use the Slido for those of you who are more timid or who want to ask a question in Czech, which I will then translate, obviously, for you, Paul, or for any of you who doesn't speak Czech. The debate is being recorded, but not live streamed, so we will put it on our website later on. So we have an exciting topic, we have excellent speakers, we have, I hope, an interesting choreography, which means we can start. This is a debate by economists, but I know that many of you in the audience are non-economists. Therefore, I would like to invite all of us to limit ourselves in technical economic terminology. And I know that both Paul and Mojmír are great in this. So in what shape is the Eurozone? Is it in good shape to take on new members? We know that currently Croatia and Bulgaria are applying. Is the shape of the Eurozone good enough so that the Czech Republic should enter it? Is the Czech Republic ready to join the Eurozone? Have the recent developments changed the way we should think about it, for instance, in terms of geopolitics, as I mentioned? These are the questions and some other for our panelists. But before I go to our guests, can we see the results of our mini poll? So, an interesting audience here. Very good. So, in our audience, 62% of you are in favor of the euro introduction, 25% are against, 13% are not decided. Just for you to know, 2 years ago, I went to a high school where I studied many years ago, the gymnasium in Strakonice. I had a speech on the euro for some 50 children, and among these 50 children, when I asked them before I started talking, I asked them how many of them were in favor of the euro. How many, Paul, would you think that out of 50 kids would support the euro at the age of 17, 18?
Well, maybe there was a selection bias. They came to listen to you, so probably a large majority in favor.
Paul, there were 2 kids out of 50 for the euro.
Really?
Only 2. No, it was a big surprise for me as well. So here, obviously, we have a different audience. So, Paul, let's start with you. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you also for inviting me to this occasion. I'm quite impressed by the number of people that have come to listen to us. So it's an interesting and important subject. And so I will be developing a few ideas which may allow us then to go on in the debate. So let me start as follows. When I compare the Czech Republic and Slovakia, since Slovakia joined the euro in 2009, it strikes me that macroeconomically there is not that much difference in the evolution of major macroeconomic variables, right? I think of economic growth. Of course, it was a little higher in Slovakia than in the Czech Republic, but this may very much be related to the fact that the levels in Slovakia are lower, and therefore there is a catch-up, and the catch-up is unrelated to the fact that Slovakia is in the Eurozone, I would argue. There is somewhat higher unemployment in Slovakia, but also probably for structural reasons, and inflation has been pretty much the same, except recently where we had this rather high surge of inflation in the Czech Republic. But on the whole, it doesn't look like that the decision of Slovakia to be in the euro has produced fantastic macroeconomic advantages for Slovakia, right? Or put differently, the fact that the Czech Republic is not in the Eurozone doesn't seem to have handicapped that country macroeconomically, right? So here we are, and we observe that in different groupings of countries, right? You look at the Nordic countries, most of them, I think of Norway, Denmark, Sweden are not in the Eurozone. There is one, Finland, that is in the Eurozone. And if I were to provide you with macroeconomic numbers or trends and asked you to point out, oh, this is Finland or this is Sweden, you wouldn't be able to do so, right? Because there is really not much difference, right? So that's a fact that we observe, right? And this leads to the idea that is a very old idea in economics, in fact, that is that money and the monetary regime has very little impact on long-term trends like growth and employment, right? Other factors influence that, real factors like technological innovation, institutional features that promote or hinder innovation, taxation, labor market institutions. These are all things that matter to determine long-term growth and long-term growth differentials between countries. And money doesn't seem to matter much for these long-term developments, right? And in a way, for traditional economists like me, it's reassuring to know that, well, money, the way it was put in the old days, money is a veil, right? It's just there, but actually in the long term, it doesn't really matter much, right? So are there then differences? Then I would say, yes, there are differences, but they are more about short-term and medium-term and stabilization, issues of stabilization of the economy and crisis management. That's where you may find differences between countries that are in a monetary union, the Eurozone, and countries that are not in a monetary union. So let me expand on this. A standalone country, like the Czech Republic, can, in principle, do more stabilization of the domestic business cycle. Right? The business cycle moves up and down, and since you kept your monetary policy, you have an instrument to influence that. You can, by monetary policy, exchange rate policy, you can, in principle, stimulate your economy, or if the need arises to reduce the movement, you can use it. That's an instrument that you have available together with fiscal policy, right? So a standalone country has more instruments to do stabilization than a country that joins in the Eurozone, a monetary union, because it loses its monetary policy instrument. It cannot do anything independently with money, right? It cannot raise or lower its interest rate, and therefore, in principle, it has less capacity to stabilize its economy. And the Czech Republic, by having this additional instrument, in principle, has a greater capacity to stabilize the economy. But this capacity to stabilize the economy is very much restricted, right? And I don't have to tell you at the central bank. It's very much restricted because there are so quick spillovers in the foreign exchange market, right? And policy errors, because policymakers, also central bankers, can make mistakes, right? And this is quickly leads to spillovers in the foreign exchange market and can actually lead to a foreign exchange crisis, right? And the need to master a crisis. And you have gone through this, and today there is again some pressure in the foreign exchange market that constrains you in actually using monetary policy for the purpose of stabilizing the economy. Now, what happens when you are in a monetary union, right? So like Slovakia is now in a monetary union. Well, these countries do not face any constraint anymore from the foreign exchange market. There is no foreign exchange market any longer because there is no national currency any longer, and therefore this is not a constraint anymore. But a new constraint arises, namely in the government bond market. And that has to do with the fact that when countries join a monetary union, the governments of these countries issue debt in a currency over which they have no control. Right? That's the difference with the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic issues debt in its own currency and has full control over that currency, in the sense that it issues that currency, it creates that currency, right? Slovakia has no such control, and therefore the Slovak authorities cannot give a guarantee to bondholders that hold Slovak government bonds issued in euros, that the Slovak government can repay them at maturity, because the Slovak government does not control the euro. And this can lead to self-fulfilling crises, as we have seen in the past, right? When investors suspect something with the government, they have issued too much debt or what have you, and they distrust it, they will sell the bonds. As a result, this will lead to a drop in the price of the bonds and an increase in the yields, leading to a similar situation as what we obtain now today in the Czech Republic, high interest rates, right? So these things can reappear. You think, oh, the foreign exchange market is gone, so therefore we don't have to worry about these things. No, the risk shift from the foreign exchange market to the domestic bond market. And in fact, I did an exercise some years ago with Yume, not my collaborator, my partner, but also collaborator, where we took the sample of Eurozone countries, right, from the 1990s to now, and in particular including the sovereign debt crisis. And what we found is that all the countries that during the 1990s had experienced foreign exchange crisis, and there were quite a lot that experienced foreign exchange crisis in 92, 93, well, these countries were exactly the same as those that experienced a sovereign debt crisis in 2010, 2012. And in fact, the yields of the early 1990s were very good predictors of the yields 20 years later in 2010, 2012. So here was like something, an original sin or something that is there that will continue to haunt you. So that is the situation, crisis in the foreign exchange market that you have while you are not in the Eurozone become or can become crisis in the government bond markets, limiting very much your capacity also to stabilize the economy with fiscal policy then, right? Because that's the only instrument that is left over for you. So the bottom line of all this is that from an economic point of view, joining the monetary union will not make much difference for Czech Republic, for the long-term prospects, right? You should not believe that this will lead you to a nirvana of higher growth or whatever. But note that when we started the Eurozone, policymakers often came out like this, right? They say in the 1990s, I still remember, in fact, let me tell you a story. I was invited by the European Commission in the early 1990s to write a report that should show that the monetary union will lead to more growth and more investment and all that. And so there were many economists that had been invited to the European Commission, and I expressed some doubts about this, right? I was not invited for the next meeting. So there was a Darwinian selection mechanism going on there, so that only the true believers that monetary union would lead to high growth and investment left over, and they produced a report that predicted high growth and investment, and this did not come out, right? It did not come out. Okay, is that left over? Or? Yeah, okay. Okay, that's fine. So that I think should be clear. Concerning short-term stabilization possibilities, of course, the detail will be different. Monetary policy cannot be used. Fiscal policy will be very much constrained, and therefore not much more stabilization capacity will be left over for the Czech Republic. I'm not saying less, right? I'm not saying less. I'm just saying, well, it's not going to be that different, right? And as I argue, by joining the Eurozone, you will eliminate potential for an exchange crisis, but you will substitute that with higher potential for crisis in government bond markets. So while the cost-benefit analysis will or cannot lead to a strong conclusion, right? But I'm telling you, if you start thinking of joining the monetary union, many cost-benefit analyses will be made, and some will show that the benefits exceed the cost, and others will show that the costs exceed the benefits. So you should be and continue to be skeptical about this. So that is essentially my bottom line. And therefore, since the economic analysis cannot lead to a clear-cut conclusion, that's really my bottom line. The economic analysis will not allow you to say, well, it's going to be beneficial or not beneficial. We just don't know. Again, I must admit, I'm agnostic. I'm not saying it's going to be bad. We just don't know. The evidence does not allow us to say that joining a monetary union will improve your long-term growth potential and improve your capacity to stabilize the economy. We just don't know. The factors that will influence this decision will be of a non-economic nature, right? That is going to be the determinant factor, right? What are these non-economic factors? Just a list here, but I'm sure you can add more. The political preferences of those in power. You might have a government that has a group of people that are enthusiastic about the euro and will want to join. Right? That happens. That has happened in some countries. There might be national security concerns that you already mentioned, right? You think there is a link between having the euro and you feel safer. That's the Finn solution, right? If you look at Finland and Sweden, right? And you would ask the question, is a monetary union better for these countries? Well, Sweden has been doing as well as Finland economically, right? There is no difference there. There are some marginal difference, but when you look at these two countries, you will not find it. But why did Finland join? Well, essentially for national security concerns, thinking that not only being in the EU, but in addition having the Eurozone is an additional security concern. That's something that has been very influential in Finland and could become also in this country. I don't know, but you never know these things, right? The power of the media and who controls the media. Right? I've seen that in England, how the power of the media can actually decide about a referendum, right? The narrative that will be told about national identity in Sweden. I remember there was a referendum and it was all about national identity. Can you imagine the banknotes? If you keep Sweden, you feel proud about being a Swede, you know. And the Swedes, many Swedes thought we should not abandon this because it's part of our identity. Well, these things play a role. If there is a referendum, how popular will the government then be that triggers that referendum? Let me give you again the example of Britain. Cameron triggered a referendum. Cameron was extremely unpopular because he had done this austerity, massive austerity that punished many people, especially the poorest, and they thought, now we can take revenge on Cameron, because Cameron said we should join, we should stay in the European Union, and then these people said, what? We are going to punish him, and we want to get out of the European Union, not because they cared about being in or out of the European Union, but because they wanted to punish Cameron. And these things can happen also in a country like the Czech Republic, right? I'm not predicting anything, but these things can happen and can be influential in the final decision whether or not you will join the euro. Thank you for your attention.
Paul, thank you very much. Very inspiring. Now we turn to Mojmír. Mojmír, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks to Marek for organizing this event, and thanks for a kind invitation. I also have to say that I'm utterly impressed and even baffled by the number of listeners. I attended a similar event at the European House a couple of weeks ago, and there was basically no one. The number of speakers was 2 or 3 times bigger than the number of attendees. So it was organized by 2 members of the European Parliament. So my takeaway out of this is that under Czech conditions, when the central bank is organizing an event on the euro, it's probably more relevant than when politicians organize it, which is telling about the debate in the Czech context especially.
It's called convening power.
Yes, 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 yes. Exactly so. And great for me to see so many well-known faces of ex-colleagues, friends, hopefully not ex-friends after I finish with my contribution. And the bank board almost has got a quorum here today. So you can make decisions if Aleš appears, if he shows up. I think that at the end of the day, it will not be as controversial as you might have thought, Marek, because I share many of the points that Professor de Graaf has just said, namely that over the very long term, the monetary policy is and should be neutral in terms of the stimulation of something that we call a production potential. So if everything works perfectly, you do not need any monetary policy. If everything is rotten, if everything goes wrong, the monetary policy will not save you anyway. But in reality, we were somewhere in between these extremes, and here I believe there is some space for autonomous monetary policy and for this one more degree of freedom on the side of macroeconomic policy, and this is my long-term position. Many of you are not surprised by this at all. By the way, I do not want to comment that much on the current stance of the monetary policy in the Eurozone. We may touch upon that later on in the debate. For me, frankly, there is really, at least at the current juncture, there's nothing to be envied about in terms of the decision-making process on the side of the board of the ECB or of the monetary conditions themselves in the Eurozone. With the current inflation, no matter how you define the core in the Eurozone, no matter how you define the caveats, having 6-month money market rates in the negative territory in the Eurozone, for me, is close to absurdity. No matter what we think about a correct stance of monetary policy under current conditions. So this is nothing that I would like to debate that for any longer. We may then have some debate about Slovakia and the impacts of the euro adoption for the Slovakian and the Slovakian economy. This particular room had played some role in this process because it was here when the Economic and Financial committee in 2008 was discussing the exchange rate parity for Slovakia. It was right here. It was a tough debate then with Jürgen Stark and others. You might imagine that. He almost hit me in the face at that point in time. Funny thing, but over all those long years, I still have got a suspicion that really there is nothing that would convince me on the Slovakian case about copying it and pasting it into the Czech or to the Czech territory. Look at it. The convergence has been still underway in Slovakia, but even before the euro adoption. And after all those long years, looking at the GDP per capita in PPP terms and looking at the comparative price levels, you still have got Slovakia as a country which is more expensive and poorer, and the country where so many people are still migrating for work to the country which is outside of the monetary union, which is called the Czech Republic, not vice versa, not the other way around. This is a long-term phenomenon. But this is about Slovakia. I would rather concentrate now on the Czech Republic, on our debate, and this is probably what you expected from me, because if I look at the outcome of the poll that you conducted, the outcome is exactly the opposite to what the general public in this country believes is the correct stance or the correct position towards the euro adoption. I do not know whether Professor de Grauwe knows that, but the Czechs are by far the biggest Eurosceptics in terms of the positive effects of euro adoption in the whole universe of countries that are supposed to join the Eurozone at some point. The proportion is always between 65 to 75% ever since the year 2009. And quite fascinating for me is that the Czechs are even more skeptics towards the euro adoption than the Swedes, who had a referendum on the euro adoption and said no in 2003. This is fascinating, and I still do not have any good explanation for that. But we may go deeper into it. So the real question is how, under what conditions, the atmosphere towards the euro adoption can change here in the Czech Republic. What can cause a change of the attitude? And I think there is one reason. And my suspicion is that it's not that unimaginable these days. I think the atmosphere can change if the Czech Republic loses the ability to stabilize itself internally in terms of the fiscal and monetary affairs. If suddenly we lose this big value that we had over the whole decades of the transition, the ability to have fiscal and monetary policy boring, which is stabilizing, and nobody is dealing with the outcome of those both policies at all. If we lose this feature, this nice feature of this country, then I think there might be a growing demand on the side of the public and authorities and politicians to join the monetary zone. Unfortunately, this motivation is probably the worst of all, because if you are entering out of despair, and this is the entrance out of despair, then you are entering in the state when nobody wants you in the club. One, and second, you are not increasing the stability of the club if you are allowed in. So entering out of despair is probably the worst motivation of all, and I think that this is the only one that is relevant for the Czech Republic. That's why I'm so nervous about the developments on the side of the fiscal policy, but also on the side of monetary policy in this country. I've got a a couple of strange habits, a couple of strange hobbies. One of them is that I constantly do read the Article 4 mission statements of the IMF. I know that nobody else does, probably, apart from Jarek, who is sitting there in the audience. And there is one unifying moment in all these Article 4 statements, and it is that the IMF, the abbreviation IMF, it's not International Monetary Fund. We dub it as, it's mostly fiscal, you know, IMF. Because all these statements are typically first focusing on what is happening on the side of the government, what is happening on the side of the fiscal policy, because the decay always goes from the government to central bank, from the fiscal policy to monetary policy, not the other way around. So when things go wrong, first they go wrong on the side of the government, and then you have got something rotten on the side of the monetary policy. That's why you always have to look very carefully first at what is happening on the fiscal side. And here we really didn't perform well over the course of the last 2 years during the COVID times, with the deficit, public finance deficit in 2001 being above 6% of GDP. And with our DNA, the Czech DNA, turning from those super conservative Czechs who are always cautious about higher indebtedness and fiscal instability to free riders who believe that you can get money without anything because the money is somewhere there and you do not have to pay for that. This is a huge change in our DNA, and this change really might mean that in a decade, it's not one election cycle, it might be 2 or 3, but in a decade, you might get into a position that you will need an umbrella of someone else to be able to sustain your macroeconomic performance and not to get to a position which will be completely unsustainable. I very much hope that it will not happen, but frankly, I do not see any political hope on a horizon here. And if this is our destiny, asking for Euro membership out of despair, then it is a real despair, both for us and for the Eurozone. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mojmír. So there we are with our introductory statements. Maybe, I mean, of course, feel free to ask questions. We have both options, so you can raise your hand and someone will come with the microphone, or you can use the Slido. Maybe before the first one starts, Paul, a question to you. You spoke about the original sin in a bit different context, and now if I link it to what Mojmír says, that the Czech Republic might join the euro from despair, what I learned at the courses given by you back in '95, which is many years ago, but I always thought that the Eurozone was foreseen for the strongest, that, you know, as the ECB was done as a copy of the Bundesbank, and around Bundesbank there was a Germany, that people actually wanted to have around the ECB something like a bigger Germany, if I may put it this way. You know, the core countries, the most developed one, the most stable one, Netherlands, Austria, Finland, France was already on the margin, Belgium was on the margin, but then we saw this very different development that many countries joined. And I asked myself, wasn't it a bit from despair as well by some of these countries? Wasn't it so that some of those countries actually wanted to buy the external credibility, or the credibility by the ECB, by being themselves too weak? Wasn't this the original sin? Any comments on this?
Surely, it's certainly true that you had two camps, right? Prior to the start of the Eurozone, you had the camp of countries around Germany that had a tradition of monetary budgetary stability, relatively low inflation, right? I'm saying relatively low inflation because the inflation rate, the average inflation rate of Germany, in the post-war Germany, prior to the Eurozone, was still more than 3.5%, right? Today, the Germans would scream if they were told that this is something that they may have to go back to. But this is just a parenthesis.
Now they have 7.
That's right. So that's a parenthesis. So you had this camp, and then you had the other camp of countries who hoped to buy stability because they had been unable domestically to provide for macroeconomic stability. I'm thinking of countries like Italy, Greece, Spain to a lesser extent. So these countries had a history of relatively high inflation, not hyperinflation, but inflation rates of 6, 7, 8%, higher budget deficits and all that. So, and of course that often led to crises in the foreign exchange market. In the early 1990s, you had these crises in the foreign exchange market, and they hit typically those countries that had been unable to maintain stable macroeconomic policies, right? And then the Eurozone was an opportunity for them to import stability, to get it from the others. And that, of course, led to a problem of Germany. Why would they want to join a club where half of them actually had this kind of motivation, very much like Mojmír is saying, this is out of desperation, but that colors then the whole of the Eurozone and the policy making. And that's why these Maastricht conditions were imposed that were quite tough and that have actually been very painful for many of these countries, right? They have had to accept painful austerity programs that went deeper than they expected. So that has been the story of the Eurozone, and this always tends to come back. Now we see, for example, that the ECB is hesitating to raise the interest rate. One of the fundamental reasons is that when the ECB does that, it is likely that these countries, these, let me call them problem countries, will face higher yields, so the spreads will increase, and we already observed that. And that, of course, is a source of concern. And then I certainly join Mojmír in saying if this country is unable to stabilize domestically, right, by monetary and fiscal policies, or if it somehow, this usually has a political origin, right, this kind of instability, and then, yeah, you may end up begging for entry, right? And would that be good for the Czech Republic? In the long run, again, it won't make much difference. But it may certainly make a difference in the short and medium run, right? And the medicine that you will have to swallow then may not be very, very good, yeah?
Mojmír, any observation on this?
I think it's really nice to go through the stories of the individual countries joining the Eurozone. You know, Marek, that I spent so much time explaining the narratives in individual countries, and exactly as Professor Paul de Grauwe has said, there is a good story in each of the countries that have joined the club. I do remember quite well the story of Slovenia, with the then Governor Mitja Gaspari sitting here and saying, we wanted to express, by joining the Eurozone, the fact that we are not a part of the Western Balkan, that we are not there. This was the expression of our attitude. I had numerous debates with my ex-colleagues in the Baltic countries who had a similar story. They said, we never wanted to have any autonomous monetary policy anyway, with the currency boards and hard packs over there. So then why not to be a part of the zone from which you accept the monetary policy anyway? This is a similar story in Bulgaria these days, with the currency boards in effect for more than 20 years, and changing conditions for accepting them into the ERM2, which is a different story. Croatia, with this such high degree of Euroization that Boris Vučić, the governor, would say that we have got no autonomy anyway. And all these stories, like you can find a good story for anyone. It's very complicated to find a similar story for the Czech Republic. And here I offer this one. So this would be my comment on that.
Thank you very much. Vladimír Dlouhý, President of our Czech Chamber of Commerce.
I will allow 2 short comments, and as a member of the audience, I should have a question as well, so 1 question. Indeed, I'm president of Czech Chamber of Commerce, and we conduct rather often our own opinion polls within the membership. We have about 25,000 members, covering about 70% of the Czech GDP. Before the COVID, on the euro acceptance, about 25% were for, about 25% were against, and about 50% said that the question is not on the table. In the second year of pandemics, it has deteriorated a little bit against euro because of the lack of solidarity perceived. We didn't perform such an opinion poll after the beginning of the Ukrainian war, which might change a little bit the situation. But it clearly shows, as an additional argument to what you have saying, that even the Czech business, and indeed we represent all the big businesses and also small and medium-scale enterprises, does not see, even surprisingly to me, any need currently to accept Europe. Remark number 1. Remark number 2, I'm an economist, but I agree with Mojmír's more or less non-economic argumentation. The adoption of euro is a political decision. I wouldn't be as pessimistic, Mojmír, that we wouldn't be able to stabilize our macroeconomics, even with the worsening of the debt-GDP ratio, public deficit, etc. You know, the man on the street did not read anything about Robert Mandel's optimal currency area, but people know instinctively that it is about joining the European values. That they know that if Europe becomes indeed a federal state with one fiscus, then the currency would function better. And people here, 30 years ago, at the end of communism, they thought we are joining Europe of the human rights, public freedom, market economy, private ownership, etc. Today, Europe is defined more like the climate change policies, minority rights, in sometimes even questioning capitalism. And many people, especially the older generation, does not feel that this is their country, that this is their state. And because we are not under the pressure to adopt euro, thanks God, then I don't think that we will soon have a strong commitment among the large population, which would allow any government to proceed towards euro. Maybe I'm wrong. I myself would be less against euro as Mojmír, for instance, is, but this is the political reality. And the question to Paul de Graaf, even if we decide tomorrow to join the euro, is Eurozone politically prepared immediately to accept some country from Central and Eastern Europe, a single one, or would it have to be a large group of countries, Czech Republic, Poland? Hungary seems to be politically out of question. So even if we decide, then there are two to tango. There must be willingness also on the European side. Thank you very much.
By the way, Paul, before you start answering, I have to say about Vladimír Dlouhý that he studied at the Catholic University of Leuven, you know, at your hometown, actually.
Yeah.
Sorry.
To answer your question, well, first of all, your comments, I find them very instructive. In particular, that the business sector is quite agnostic about the benefits of being in the euro or not, right? Doesn't see any big problem there not being in the Eurozone. And I, of course, fully agree that it's going to be a political decision. This was also my initial introduction. But on your question, would the Eurozone politically accept the Czech Republic? And then the answer is, of course. I mean, let's not forget that when you joined the European Union, this was a treaty that stipulates that you have to join the Eurozone, provided the conditions that are spelled out in the Maastricht Treaty are satisfied. The conditions that you know, debt to GDP ratio, deficit, inflation, and all that. And if they are not satisfied, you cannot enter, but as soon as they are satisfied, you actually have no choice. You should. Of course, we know that there are loopholes in the treaty, and that Sweden, for example, has been using. The loophole is, one of the 5 conditions is that 2 years before you enter, you should have a fixed exchange rate with the euro. So now the Swedish government has decided not to have a fixed exchange rate with the euro, and therefore they can say, we don't satisfy the conditions. and so they use a loophole that is there in the treaty. They don't want to be in the Eurozone, and although legally they have to, they get away with not being in. So both are possible, but surely if you were to decide to enter, there would be a party in Frankfurt. You would be accepted with open arms, and there would be celebration. I'm not saying that necessarily that this would be good for the Eurozone. I'm susceptible to the idea that the Eurozone is very difficult to manage today, right? Because there are divergent interests and movements. And if you add one more country, this just makes it even more difficult. But this being said, I don't think there is a problem there.
It's not immediate anyway. 2 years ERM2 plus 1 year plus the rest of the current year, so 3 plus. Yeah. 4 to 5. But one thing which has not been mentioned, and I think is being overlooked in the Czech debate, is that the situation on the side of individual countries has been constantly changing. So I do not know whether you are aware of that, but for Hungary now to join the Eurozone, they would need again to change the constitution, because Viktor Orbán established a clause within the constitution stating that the currency is the Hungarian forint. So someone would have to have a constitutional majority in Hungary to change the constitution first. So it's different compared to other countries.
Maybe it's my ignorance here, but one condition would also be that legislation in the country exists that keeps the central bank politically independent, right?
Yes.
And is that the case in this country?
I mean, in the Czech Republic, yes. So far, yes.
So far, yes. Okay. Yes.
What would you expect from board members?
No, I would say, I would say if there is one really independent, has been one really independent central bank in Central Eastern Europe, then it has been the Czech National Bank.
As an external observer, I tend to agree.
Oldřich Dědek, by the way, he's a board member of the Czech National Bank, but before he was the Mr. Euro at the period when we thought we could join the Eurozone, but it is some years ago. Oldřich, please.
Okay, thanks, Mark, for organizing some interesting debate. I regret that I forgot my phone in my office. Otherwise, one supporter of the question A, there would be more. I have 3 short comments. Yes, first one is related to the original sin. I think, Mr. Grauwe, that the national currency is not actually, and the evidence shows that it's not guarantee that investors are assured that the government will be repaid. Yes, because at the beginning of the global financial crisis, we had collapses of non-euro countries as well. Hungary, yes, Romania, Latvia, not mentioning Iceland. So these are countries which had to take foreign assistance, as otherwise their monetary regimes and fiscal regime would collapse. The second remark, is there any difference? Yes, the impression is that it doesn't matter too much whether we are in or out, that from the macroeconomic point of view, the situation is the same. I think there is one big difference, as I understand it, and this is a remarkable change in the public support of those countries who joined the Eurozone. Assuming that statistics of Eurobarometer are not falsified, okay, it means that there is a mass majority of people supporting the euro. Even in Baltic states, it was mentioned that I was Mr. Euro at that time. So before euro accession, the support of euro in Baltic states was barely above 50%. Now it's around 80%. Answering the question, do you think that the euro is a good thing for your country? We can see in Slovakia, okay, there is a substantial support. There is no party questioning joining the Eurozone. And probably, you are probably the better expert on this, I think that a strong argument in this favor is that even those Eurosceptics in Western countries like Le Pen, yes, Salvini in Italy, they don't raise the question whether their country should leave the Eurozone because there is no public support, yes, no demand for this question. So this is the second remark. And the last one is there any, my impression is there any strong economic argument for joining the Eurozone? And on my side, I think that we should not forget the idea of a well-functioning single market. And there is a, I think, strong argument that the national currencies are a kind of trade barriers to well-functioning single market. My favorite argument is a free riding problem. Those countries which can be proud of national currencies can use this advantage only if other currencies cannot do it. And there is, I think, a long history in the European Union with different exchange rate regimes showing that exchange rate cooperation doesn't work so much. Yes, you mean ERM2. Do you think that the floating exchange rates would suit better the idea of a single market and so on? So from this point of view, we should not forget that the euro is one important component which improves the efficiency of single market. As a result of financial crisis, there was a banking union. I think is even more radical jump forward in integration than the euro adoption and some other arguments well used. So that's my defense, yes, of economic rationale of monetary union. Of course, it doesn't work well. Yes, we had different countries, division between South and North and East and West and so on. But as integration continues, I think it's my impression that the monetary union improves the converges, pushes the countries to converge to some standard. It may take more time than it was envisioned at the first time, but I think that the process is inevitable. And for example, if I can, it is my last remark. There is a big debate about a kind of Marshall Plan for Ukraine. Yes, how to reconstruct. I think it will be a big impetus for a new round of European bonds, yes, for finding the finance for financing the Ukraine. Single bonds, European bonds, are extremely popular among investment community, yes, because the rating is okay, the security is also affordable. So it was, I think, Marek said it's a kind of Hamiltonian moment, yes. Okay, so I think that this Hamiltonian process will continue.
So you can see, Paul, that this is our Mr. Euro. I'm happy that I'm only the moderator because we have frequent exchanges with Oldřich on the questions of adopting the euro. But please, the floor is yours. And then Mojmír, of course, can.
It's very good.
Then please, I will come to some of your questions so that, don't worry, I don't ignore you. Please.
I like to meet a real euro enthusiast, right? So let me go through the different points that you developed. So I'm not going to say that you are wrong or something, right? No, not at all. I mean, many of the things that you mentioned are quite right. The first point, in fact, it's what I also said in my talk. The nature of the crisis that countries will confront is different, whether you are outside or inside the monetary union. If you are outside the monetary union, financial crisis will typically be focused, canalized to the foreign exchange market. That's where much of the action will be. And then the examples you gave confirmed this, right? Some countries like Hungary, Iceland, right, had a banking crisis, like so many other countries. And this immediately showed up also in the foreign exchange market, right? Not so much in the bond market, right, but in the foreign exchange market. So a banking crisis, if you are in or outside the monetary union, you can have banking crisis, right? And the evidence has shown that this happens. And then is the foreign exchange market that will take much of the pressure, right? That you have to deal with it, then you have to allow the currency to depreciate, and this may have some benefits, but also some costs and all that. So it's there, right? If you are not in the Eurozone, then it's the government bond market that will take much of the action. Why? Because in contrast with the standalone country, there is no backup in the government bond market, right? At least until the ECB in the Eurozone came to act in 2012 and said, with the OMT program, that it is willing to provide unlimited amount of liquidity in government bond markets in times of crisis. But before that, there was no backup, and that's why these crises would show up in the bond market. They can still show up in the bond market if the ECB at some point decides that they don't want to support a particular country in its government bond market. So there, again, not much difference, right? The Eurobarometer, yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, and it's very puzzling. I mean, it's, you know, there was an ad, I forgot which product that was. It said, try it, you like it. So you just try it, and then you will like it. So try the Eurozone, and you will like it. And that seems to have worked, right, and in a number of countries, those that you mentioned, right? Once you are in, you start to identify with this thing, and you say, well, it's great. Also in countries, I think, where there is a distrust vis-à-vis their own governments, like for example, Italy. And other countries. Greece, for example, you would think Greece has been hit so badly, right? Yet the euro is popular. My hypothesis is it might very well be that the Greeks see that as a beacon of stability, given the poor performance of their government and their institutions, right? And that may play a role there. So it could also be that in the case, if you get the scenario that Mojmír was developing, that after a few months in Czech Republic, the Eurobarometer would say 70% in favor of the euro. I think it's a great idea. This might happen, huh? If we look at what has happened in some other countries. You said national currencies, the existence of national currencies are obstacles to the single market. Yes, if you maintain your national currency, that that leads to exchange rate fluctuations, some uncertainty, and therefore that's an impediment for the smooth functioning of the internal market. And we all agree that the internal market actually provides the benefits, right? So that's a big contrast that I just want to mention here. The costs and benefits of monetary union for growth and employment and investment are unclear. We don't really know. The benefits of free trade, single market, they are overwhelmingly positive, although the distribution of these benefits may not always be right. But for a country as a whole, and the evidence, when you look at the Czech Republic, Slovakia, many other countries in Central Europe that have been introduced in this single market, the evidence is so overwhelming that this is beneficial, right, for countries as a whole. Not so for monetary union. We don't have the evidence that we have these benefits. We just don't know. I mean, and there's so much evidence that says that, yes, nothing to be seen, very little to be seen there, right? And that's a fact of life. So you may say, well, but if you maintain, why is that then? Because your point is maintaining your own currency is an obstacle, so therefore should reduce the benefits of a single market for a country. But don't forget that when you enter monetary union, yes, you reduce the risk associated with foreign exchange movements, but you introduce new risks. New risks, for example, the bond markets, the yields can go way up, right? We have seen that during the sovereign debt crisis, suddenly huge crisis in a number of countries, which also disrupts the single market. So it's not true that by entering a monetary union, you reduce systemic risk. You reduce the risk associated with foreign exchange rates, but you may introduce new risks. And in the end, we don't really know. It's like a balloon, you know, you have these long balloons, you push on one side, it's not as big there, but it's bigger on the other side. And so the systemic risk, it's unclear what happens with that. Last point did the Eurozone lead to convergence? Very little evidence that this was the case. Look at Greece, that's an example where it certainly did not, right? A huge divergence of per capita GDP in Greece, right? Other countries actually have stopped their convergence. Countries like Portugal have stopped their convergence. So it's not clear that being in the Eurozone leads to convergence, right? And that has to do with the fact that many other things happen, right? Your wage development may be out of line, and you have no way to correct for this anymore, right? And this happens, and this can then lead to periods, relatively long periods of low growth. Think of Germany, right? In the first 10 years of the Eurozone, Germany was considered the sick man of Europe. Can you imagine, right? It had too high wages, and it had to do these efforts to reduce wages, creating conditions of high unemployment and a feeling of crisis. And then it overcame this, and everything went better. So these things are very difficult to predict, but it's certainly not correct to say that it leads to convergence. We have no evidence for that.
I would start from the very end. I totally agree with this point. There's not a convincing empirical evidence for this tough claim that the Eurozone membership in itself somehow promotes or encourages convergence. Actually, what is quite interesting is that the countries from the Central and Eastern Europe, without sharing the same currency with the Eurozone, were converging to the levels of the current Eurozone much faster than some parts of the Eurozone itself over the course of the last 2 decades. So quite paradoxically for staunch supporters of the euro. I typically do not agree with Oda Jedek on anything. That's standard. So I also do not share the view that you do need to have a single currency for a single market. You do not. need to have a single currency. But there's one point that I share with you, Olda, and this is this path dependency. Once you are in, it's really terribly complicated to go out. Once you join, it's really, you are predetermined and predestined to stay there. But for me, the recommendation stemming out from this fact is different. Think twice before joining. And then we've got this whole bunch of... Yeah.
I must say I'm a bit disappointed because I think there is too much harmony between my two speakers. I thought it would be
surprisingly
different, but at least we have some dissonance between us and the audience. Now let's go to some of the questions. I think what is interesting, let's take the question, the first one and the third one, because I think they seem to be, to me at least, a bit opposite. The first one says, how do you find the current situation, for instance, in Estonia, with the inflation rate at almost 20% and zero nominal interest rates, or I would say negative nominal interest rates? Do benefits of euro prevail yet? And then look at question 3. In the case of accepting the euro as the new Czech currency, what are the possible negative, didn't you want to say positive consequences, but you said the negative. So what would be the possible negative consequences if there are any? So I think the first question is somewhat critical, the third question is somewhat positive, if you can react to them.
Yeah, on the first one, Estonia, I didn't even know that it was 20% in Estonia.
Close to.
Yeah, that's quite, so it's more than here, right? Here you have 14 or something, yes, I understand. Yes. Yeah.
The Baltics are higher than
Yeah, that's troublesome, huh? I mean, what can I say? 20% inflation and nominal interest rate 0, which creates a potential for actually very booming conditions, huh? And the issue will be to what extent this may not lead to a wage price spiral in that country, right? When you have 20% inflation, you don't need much imagination to see that wage earners will want to get compensation quickly, huh? Because they lose so much purchasing power. And once this process of wage price spiral is set in motion, it becomes endemic, and it's very difficult to stop. And then Estonia could actually be pushed into a path of overvaluation. I mean, in the old parlance, of course it doesn't have its own currency, but overvaluation of the currency, that is relative unit labor costs that have completely gone out of line, leading to the necessity later on then to correct for this in a very painful way. So that is the risk that Estonia now has with these numbers, right? If they are not quickly corrected, they could be in a situation where for a number of years they will have to do heroic efforts to bring back this unit labor cost, at least if they are not able to control today the wage price spiral, and with 20%, it seems to me it's going to be difficult. So that's
may I have a follow-up question? Yeah, if you look at the inflation data of the euro area, you would see countries like, I think it's France, Portugal, close to 5%. This is they have the lowest inflation. The highest is Estonia, 19.1. I think the second one is Lithuania. Malta is also among the lowest. And the average, the euro area average 7.3. If you were sitting on the board of the ECB, what would you do? Having such a diversity within your family, ranging from 5 to 20. And what is then the optimal monetary policy?
I would panic. I would ask for a glass of wine to deal with this. No, this is really, well, this is the standard problem in monetary unions, right? When you have divergence of that nature and that this gets out of hand, then you will have big problems in the future, no doubt about this, right? Some countries being forced into what economists call internal devaluations, right? After a while, they have to bring down prices and wages, because if you have 1 year 20% inflation and the others, like in France, only 5%, it means that the price level in Estonia in just 1 year has become 15% higher than in France. If wages then also adjust to that, you get these divergences of levels of wages and prices, which at some time you have to correct, because they will have huge problems of competitiveness. And how do you correct it? But by trying to bring them down. But that's very difficult because of rigidities. And in the old days, when they had their own currency, they could devalue and do it in one stroke, right? 20% devaluation, and there you go again. It's like restarting the engine, right, that you can do. That's what the Italians did all the time, right? They were all the time in a situation like this, too much inflation, wages increased, and then devaluation, that was actually restarting the engine, and they did it. That was their business model, actually, right? The car would drive, slow down because too much inflation and wages, and then restarting it again. And so they could do that for a number of decades. Now they cannot do it, and they have to do it the hard way. And if that goes on, Estonia will be in deep trouble, and they will have to do it in a hard way, and they may not like it, for sure.
Yes. Looking at all the Baltic countries, be it Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania, one should know that really, ever since their new establishment after the year 2089, they never had their own monetary policy of any kind. So they are, to some extent, used to these huge external and internal imbalances. This is not the first time ever that the inflation is skyrocketing. It's not the first time ever, for instance, in the past when the external imbalance was skyrocketing. It was at the end of 90s, it was prior to the 2008. So these countries somehow managed to live with huge imbalances which they cannot tackle with domestic policies. After the year 2008, after the great financial crisis, they tackled that with really harsh fiscal policy and fiscal policy measures, unimaginable in the rest of Europe. I do not know what are they going to do these days. Big question mark. But looking at the Eurozone and the debate evolving over there about the correct stance of the monetary policy, I'm somewhat frustrated and puzzled by this way of thinking, which says that there should be a dual monetary policy, that you should continue buying bonds, so ease the monetary conditions for some countries within the monetary zone and stop doing it for other part of the same monetary zone. Because doing this dual monetary policy means that basically you haven't got a single monetary zone. And this is something that is really in the air.
So can we answer the question number 3, in case of accepting the euro as a new Czech currency, what are the possible negative consequences? Because I thought we spoke only about negative consequences, but...
I will be very brief, if I may. I will answer also the second question. What are the security benefits?
Yes, I wanted to come to it. Please do it.
There are none, in my eyes. None. In terms of national security, there are other measures for that. And what are the negative consequences? This is what I have already said. I think that the situation that the 70% of this population supports euro adoption means that we are in such a dire macroeconomic situation that I, as a patriot, would not like to see that. So this is it. The situation or the conditions under which we would be really seriously thinking about that would mean that we are lost.
What currency will be used in the Czech Republic in 2030? Your personal opinion. Mojmír already said it, I think.
Still the Czech crown.
Paul, do you have any view on what currency we will use in the Czech Republic in 2030?
You know, one of the great things of using cards, debit and credit cards, is that you barely know that there is a Czech currency. When I go to the restaurant here, I show my credit card, and when I looked at the menu, I used this rule: divide by 100, multiply by 4, And then I use my, and then I give my credit card, and that's it. In the old days, I remember when I went to conferences, I actually had to go to the bank in Belgium and buy the banknotes, right? And you lost money doing this, and you had to carry all these banknotes with you. But these days, what's the difference? I mean, yeah. So therefore, I really don't know whether it will be the euro or the Czech currency.
You don't have to answer.
I don't know, and I can live very well. What this now?
What would you wish us to use? Corona or euro? Euro.
Yeah, as I said, it's going to be no. I mean, of course, at some point you might have perceptions that take national security, right? I agree with you that it should make a difference. You're a member of NATO, and that's the thing that gives you national security, right? And the euro doesn't add anything to this. But the perception might be very different. People might have a different perception, thinking that it's an additional link and tie with the West, and then, yeah, then people may actually want to have it for these reasons, and then I would have to respect this and say, that's fine with me.
With this psychological factor, I do agree. Mm.
May I just, I will continue soon with these questions. Another one, in the political debate in the Czech Republic, it is mentioned from time to time that we should not enter the euro, but we should enter the ERM2. It's even a proposal by one of the parties now being in the government. Would you have any comment on that?
Well, like Denmark does, right? That's what Denmark does. Yeah, I mean, there is something weird with the Danish position, right? They are in that situation. They kept their national currency, and in order to make it possible, they will actually follow, like copy-paste, whatever decision the ECB makes, right? If Frankfurt decides this or that, they will follow almost within the hour, right? And do the same thing. So they have totally lost monetary autonomy, while they are not in Frankfurt to decide about this with the others. So that's the real strange situation. Why do you want to be in a position where you slavishly follow the decisions made in Frankfurt and refuse to be involved in the decision-making process, while you could, with the same effects, right? Of course, then they say, well, we have some insurance, and you have your own currency, so this creates some insurance in case something happens. Who knows? Then we have this thing, we can still use it. Okay, but then you ask the policymakers, do you consider ever to use that insurance? They say, no, never. We never want to use that. I say, why do you buy an insurance that you never want to use it? So it can only give you disadvantages. I mean, yeah, but again there, I suspect there is this kind of national identity, your own currency. And is it a king or a queen that you can put there on the banknote?
Not in our case.
Having a king or a queen.
We don't have one.
You don't have one, I know. We have one. So we lost that capacity to, in the past we had the king on our banknotes, but you know, the Belgians are not very nationalistic. They don't give a damn about kings and prime ministers. So that never played a role in our country.
Mojmír, any comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to add exactly that, because when you have got a frank discussions and exchanges of views with friends in Denmark, with the Danes, they say exactly this point. Exactly this point. Mm-hmm. We want to have banknotes and coins with the monarch on it. And this is the psychology. It doesn't make sense in terms of monetary policy, exactly as you said. It's also a long story and also a path dependency, because they've got a hard peg towards the German mark ever since the year 1980. so they just transform it into a hard peg towards the euro. But for me, it doesn't make sense. But it works for Danes quite well for decades. And in terms of the ERM2 membership, I will be very consistent here. Stay there for only as long as is absolutely necessary, not 1 day or 1 week longer. Otherwise, you are making a whole lot of new troubles. But the government opened up a completely new issue, not just this, but the issue of what I would call a dual circulation of two currencies on this soil, with the idea being floated that it would be allowed to taxpayers to decide whether they want to actually pay the taxes in the Czech koruna or in euro, that it would be an open option, open possibility for all the taxpayers to make this decision. And here I have to be absolutely clear. Rather than these hybrid models, it's then better to have one currency, be it the first one or the second one, but to open up a exchange rate position of the government, to open it up and to transfer by this all the costs of hedging on the public sphere, on the fiscal, is probably worse than deciding on any currency, be it this one, that one, or a third one.
So basically we agree that entering the ERM2 is the worst possible solution, right? So either to have the full flexibility, or if you want to join the currency area, then to do it to the end.
That's right. If you want to be in the ERM and as a permanent position like Denmark, then you have to abandon any pretense that you will use monetary policy for domestic purposes, and you can only use it for keeping the peg fixed, right? And so in other words, it's like entering the Eurozone, where you also lose the monetary policy instrument. So ERM as a permanent position is a loss of your monetary policy instrument. And then the issue that we mentioned is that, why do you want to do it? Because you have no power in the decision process. At least if you go to Frankfurt, you can sometimes influence people. Huh? Of course, if you are, you have many people there, so you may not always be successful, but it can happen once in a while that you can help a decision to go one way or the other, especially when there is uncertainty. Coalitions have to be formed, and it sometimes depends on just one. And so these things matter, and you give away this possibilities, to me, is totally illogical. But again, the emotions prevail, you know, and emotions often will lead to decisions that are different from the rational decisions.
Yeah, thank you. The question on the top of the screen, I think, goes back to your presentation at the beginning of Paul, when you compared the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and the person asks that there are no long-term differences, which you mentioned, but we have seen larger fiscal and household indebtedness in Slovakia. Isn't it a crucial difference?
Yeah, I must say I haven't looked into that in detail, so I don't know much about this. I prefer not to answer.
No problem. Mojmír?
Yes, it is true. Both on the side of fiscal households, but also companies, if I'm not mistaken. The level of indebtedness is slightly higher. But if I'm not mistaken, on the side of companies, it was slightly higher even prior to the euro adoption. The question is about whether the euro adoption in itself has not fostered or somehow encouraged the indebtedness. I probably haven't seen any good paper confirming this, but the levels are higher. That's true.
Next question: what consequences will the euro adoption has for fiscal policy pursued by the government? I mean, how will it be more fiscally independent, less? I think you somewhat said it already.
There will certainly be not more fiscal independence, right? In general, once you join the Eurozone, you have to abide by the fiscal rules and the fiscal compact. For the moment, it has been set aside because of First the pandemic, now Ukraine, but it will come back. And this will certainly be something that constrains fiscal policy pursued by the government. Now, is this constraint going to be bigger? Again, it's not clear, because if you keep your own currency and you use a fiscal policy that is perceived by financial market to be too unconstrained, then they may hit back in the foreign exchange market that constrains you. Let me give the example. It's a very old example of in France in the 1980s, when Mitterrand came to power in the early 1980s. He would do a totally different fiscal policy, takeover, expansion, and in no time, the foreign exchange market hit back, you know, and they had to defend the French franc. In the end, they had to devalue, and they had to go back. Actually, Mitterrand admitted, I can't face this, and so it failed, actually. So there are also constraints there that are imposed by financial markets. Whether this is right or wrong is another matter, but that's what happened. So again, it's unclear whether you can do more or less with fiscal policy. Let me put it in the Eurozone, depending also on what nature the new fiscal rules will be, right? Because there's a lot of discussion about these fiscal rules. Will there be some change in these fiscal rules, or do we just go back to the old rules? That has to, we don't know for the moment. One thing that we surely should change in the Eurozone, which I think is a big burden, that is that we impose balanced budget over the business cycle. In other words, the structural budget should be in equilibrium. That means that if you have a deficit during a recession, it should be compensated by surplus in a boom, so that over the business cycle, you have a balanced budget. And I think that's really a very bad rule, because there's no reason why governments cannot finance public investments by issuing bonds, because this rule makes that impossible, right? This rule says, over the business side, you cannot add debt. But if you want to increase public investment, the rule says you cannot finance that by debt. You have to either raise taxes or reduce other spending. And that's not a good rule. Companies that have good ideas, good projects, they will finance it by debt. Governments that have good projects, public investment, and we need a lot of public investments, right, in the environment, in energy provision, and all that. There is no reason why governments would not be allowed to issue debt, because they create an asset that is productive and that will have a return in the future, and the price you pay is the interest on the debt. And as long as the expected return on this public investment exceeds the cost of borrowing, which is the case in most countries these days, we should be able to do that. So that is a rule that still exists and will constrain you, right? And I don't think that would be a good case. We should certainly try to change that.
So you want to say that we should exclude from the deficit the investment expenditure?
That's right. That existed in the past in many countries, right? In many countries you had a capital budget, and then the current budget. The current budget has to be in equilibrium over the business cycle, but the capital budget doesn't have to be in equilibrium.
I think it makes sense, of course, economically, but I think it rests on the assumption which you mentioned, that the yield of this investment is higher than the borrowing cost, which I think can be put under question mark, at least in some countries.
Well, in some countries, but look at the Eurozone countries these days. And now the interest rates have increased a bit, right? But it's still around 1 to 2%, which is extremely low. 10-year bonds or even 20-year bonds at 2%. I'm sure you can find public investment projects that earn more than 1 or 2% a year. I mean, if you can't, then you lack imagination. Huh? I mean, if policymakers like it, I can help them, you know, and tell them where to invest. And there are so many existential reasons why we should do that. And the cost of borrowing is still extremely low. But yet in the Eurozone, we are being told you should not finance this by issuing debt. That's perverse. That's really a totally wrong rule. Of course, what now happens is that the European Commission tries to do it, right, with this next generation EU. It's an attempt to do what national governments can actually do better, right? Yes. Have public investment and then issue bonds. So the European Commission and the European institutions tell the national governments, you should not issue bonds for public investment. We will do it. Mm-hmm. Why would you be better in doing this, right? Yes. There's no reason to believe that. Yes. Yeah.
Mojmír, any observation?
Yes, I think this question of Petr Kříž is really, really important. I think there are two phases. The first phase is the Euro adoption process and then Eurozone membership. And in the Euro adoption process, it's exactly as Paul de Grauwe has said, the room for maneuver might be smaller and maybe for good reasons. But then after this milestone, once the country joins actually the Eurozone, it might mean even more irresponsibility than prior to joining the Eurozone, right? For the reason that you are now in a bigger club. So if you look at the average figures, you will see that on average the Eurozone indebtedness on the side of the public sector is higher than the indebtedness of the EU. So the members of the Eurozone are on average more indebted on the public, in the area of public sector than non-members. And in terms of the fiscal rules, this is my new reincarnation. So I can tell you quite clearly that if there are any new rules in the EU, in the area of fiscal, these rules will be weaker than the current ones. There's just one way where we are going to go, just weaker rules. We will have more jointly issued and guaranteed debt, no doubt about that. The next gen EU was supposed to be just one-off, and it will not be one-off, it will be repeated for the great success of Next Gen EU. And I think that the effective limits of indebtedness on the side of individual countries mean that we will try to explore where are the limits of the jointly guaranteed debt issuance on the EU level. That's my strong, very strong expectation.
Thank you, Mojmír. So let's try to get to the end slowly. So I would like to finish within some, 5 to 7 minutes. Can we go to these digital or crypto kind of questions? The first one, may the introduction of the digital euro tilt the public opinion in favor of joining the Eurozone? Do you think that it would have any effect if...
And it's meant the central bank digital currency, like this?
Yeah, I think it's called, I think central bank, because digital euro you already have, you all have it.
Yes,
I think it's meant by central bank digital currency. If they have
it's all about whether we need CBDC. For me, it's a solution in a search of a problem. So I'm not sure that we need it at all. So for me, it's irrelevant in terms of the euro adoption.
Yeah, I think I agree with this. There is a lot of talk now, and also in many central banks, they are having a lot of committees coming together to discuss plans.
A lot of hype.
Yeah. Indeed, it will make not much difference in practical life. We already have, you call it digital, the cards that we have are digital also. I mean, this is all digital. It's not paper anymore. Of course, the underlying technology may change, blockchain technology versus what we have now, but this will all make not much difference. This digital currencies are now cheap, convenient. How much better can you make them, right?
I just wonder if we are not too rational, both you, Mojmír, and no, because also the second question, how will the cryptocurrencies influence the consideration? Maybe young people think about it a bit differently. I don't know. But would you have an observation on the second question?
But the cryptocurrency, it's something different. Huh? But it's not. Let's not call it currencies, right? They are not currencies. They are
These
assets.
are crypto assets.
That's right. They are assets like gold is an asset. And people like to buy gold when they feel uncertain, and the price of gold can go up and down, and the price of crypto assets goes even more up and down than the price of gold, even more volatile. So you can make more money, but you can also lose more money with crypto assets. And there is a hype about this, and of course there is also the fact that it can be used by criminal gangs and the criminal, the underground part of society that likes to use this, because instead of having to cross the Alps with a big bag of banknotes, they can now do it in a different way, right? And so that's of course a change. That's something real, but it's not something that will affect us in our daily life, except if you like to speculate. But you can speculate with other things also than crypto assets.
Let me put it differently. Rather than dealing with these nice, fancy issues like CBDCs and crypto assets, my expectation is that monetary policymakers in Europe will have completely different tasks and completely different problems in the years to come, namely the runaway inflation, rather than dealing with these nice stuff like the years prior to 2022.
So now we will again open the poll. We will ask you 3 questions. So if you could go back to I will give you some time. I will ask the final question to the audience, but we will ask you 3 questions. We will repeat the question number 1, meaning if you changed your opinion or not. But then there are 2 additional questions. Ondřej, could you show them to me? So the first one is the same. The second one, could you show them? Do you think the introduction, this is the second question, of the euro would have positive or negative consequences for the Czech Republic? So is it something good or bad for us? And the question number 3, if you think that the Czech Republic is ready to introduce the euro. So you can answer these questions. We will show you the results later on. Don't show them now. We will show them later. But before you answer these questions, which you have on the app, Paul, the final question, do you think that the creation of the euro helped deepening of the European integration? Do you think people feel more together? Do they feel better? Or do you think it's a source of additional problems?
It's a little bit everything of what you say. It has been a source of new problems, severe problems. The sovereign debt crisis was a severe problem, led at some point to such an intense crisis that there was a fear of implosion of the thing. It has led in a number of countries to very strong scars, right? Social and economic scars. It has not led to the idea of more growth and not even more integration. Of course, you may also argue that we have created a symbol of integration. The euro is a symbol of European Union, which is important, right? It's there. It's probably the most visible realization of integration in Europe, right? The fact that we use the same currency, and in that sense, it is positive because it creates, an environment, sentiments in favor. I mean, it's something that has been achieved that you don't want to lose, right? That also the Eurobarometer points out. You don't want to lose that. It's something very visible, and therefore psychologically quite important. So I wouldn't want to do it away. When it started in the 1990s, I was very skeptical, as I mentioned earlier, right? I thought we took too many risks. And this actually has come out. But now I take the view we are in there. It's a common project. It creates this attitude of, yes, we are one. We are coming closer to being one nation. Of course, I'm using the word nation a little with hesitation, but surely this is a very visible thing that we have achieved and that we should cherish and not try to throw away.
Mojmír?
Well, I would very much agree. I think that in terms of symbols and psychology, it strengthened the idea of some European identity. Whether we can have one or not is not a question. But in practical terms, I think it has not solved any single big issue that the Europe is dealing with.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers. I think we come to the end of our debate. Can we now see the results of our mini polls? So the question still back, well, we have a bit different sample now. Some people left, so it's not the same. So the number of people agreeing that they are in favor, it was before, I think it was 62. Yeah. Now it's 56, but we don't know if it's because your arguments were so impressive or because some people left. Then the second question. Do you think the introduction of the euro would have a positive or negative? Positive consequences, 63%. Wow. Negative 20, don't know 17. Well, we have a specific sample of people here, which is, of course, linked to the topic, I think, or those who are interested in the euro are also in favor of it, would be my interpretation. And number 3, is the Czech Republic ready? Only 48%. Well, now with the high inflation, but in general, I would say we are more or less ready. No 43% or no 9%. Interesting. So, with that, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I hope to see you next time. And thank you, Paul, for coming to Prague and for participation in this debate. And thank you, Mojmír, also. Thank you.